It's a dangerous week ahead as Bitcoin opens up in a bit of a precarious place to start off this week, and that is going to be the topic of today, as well as looking at a little bit of traditional markets here too, and even a Bitcoin setup in this case, maybe not the one that many people are used towards. Other than that, I want to welcome you back to the Krown Crypto channel. I am feeling significantly better now, although still a little bit to go, but I did want to start off this week with a nice positive message, a very, very positive message of unity in these times of such disunity and disorganization and so much hatred of both political sides towards each other, and it is this. Isn't it beautiful? Just watching them hand in hand. If Kamala really looked like that, I think she'd probably win, just by the aesthetics of it. Oh, how beautiful. Trump has some painted nails. And there it is, the future. The absolute beautiful future. You have to love it, man. You have to love it. And we can just jump right into this analysis on that note. So first things first, looking at the new momentum pivots as Bitcoin does open up, obviously a new daily and a weekly and a 5-day last night, or 2 nights ago that was, I do want to just kind of highlight this sort of, dangerous positioning that things are in as of right now. In this case, we can see that daily stochastic momentum is actually going to cross the downside, rejecting the bullish control zone. As long as Bitcoin's below 59,400, it's not just on the daily time frame, but it's also on the 2-day time frame as well, which will shift to the downside upon tonight's closure. Bitcoin closed below 59,000 bucks. Obviously, it's a long day left to go, but Bitcoin is below that pivot as of right now. This is obviously the odd man out because the 5-day time frame, as we discussed in yesterday's video, is freshly down, playing out to this nice trendline regression, which has been governing the highs since March of this year. And then the weekly time frame is also in a bit of a tough place here because while it technically is still upright, as of right now, the current pivot has actually shifted significantly. It shifted like $10,000. $10,000. Yesterday, it was $54,000. Now it is $64,200. So that is quite interesting to me, meaning that, Bitcoin does have downside pressure. And if we are going to see a downside move, this week is a pretty damn good week to try something like that as we do go back into actual charts right here. Looking at, of course, the weekly HPDR, which is what we open up this video with, we can see that Bitcoin is still operating below the median. And on top of that, the bottom side of the 38.2 level has actually stepped down significantly here. Before it was, I think, around like 55 or 56. Now it is all the way down at 52,300. So, I would be looking for Bitcoin to play out a range basically between the median, which is 60,000 bucks, and as far down as that, actually 52,000. If Bitcoin gets rejected from 60,000 yet again, so that kind of is the range for me as of right now. It doesn't mean that Bitcoin can't salvage itself, but as long as Bitcoin is below $60,000, just as like kind of like like an obvious round even number to kind of be aware of. It is risk here. It is risk, and I suspect that there will be a downside try this week. The question is, does that actually get any real follow through, or does it end up being one of these big wicks yet again? It could very easily look something like, I'm not saying it's going to go down this far, but just for example's sake, comes down here, pops back up by end of week, and you get another one of these dojis here. I think that's kind of like the bullish view of this, is that Bitcoin's going to continue to kind of trudge sideways, for another week. Realistically, probably another few weeks coming into at least early to mid-September. I do think that this kind of like best case scenario is just trudging sideways. Very unlikely is it going to be one of these massive, green dildos just straight from here. There's obviously always a small probability of that, but I would say that it is a very, very small probability as of right now. And realistically, it's preparing for whatever this, or bracing for whatever this move is kind of setting up for early this week. So I would be aware of that. I would also be aware that if Bitcoin does come down to about very low 52, that is, I would be looking for a bounce there. I'm not saying it's going to get exactly down around there, but just, if it did, that would be a good bounce area. And as we'll go over in this setup right here, this is actually a short setup, kind of the same thing as the 5 exponential moving average strategy that I've been showing for the daily and 12-hour for that matter as well. But I'm just applying it here to the downside. There's a few other conditions on top of it as well, but we can see see that over the history of Bitcoin, it has been decent, not certainly not as good as the upside, because, Bitcoin is generally an upside asset, but still, positive, or, very net positive net profit here. In this case, we can see that using this strategy has produced about a just over 37% strike rate. And when we go into the performance summary, we can see that the average winning trade has produced 6% in terms of price action, versus the average losing trade, which loses an average of 2.5%. Putting that into actual numbers, if this one does work out as a winning trade, which, by the way, the last two have actually failed, well, what would 6% from this current entry be? Because it did actually fire off this past evening. 6% to the downside puts Bitcoin where? Just below 55, somewhere between 54.5 to 55,000 bucks. So, perhaps that could be an area of interest to the downside. I do think worst case scenario this week we'd get something down around here, but very likely a bounce as well. So, let's just call it again below 55, or, somewhere between 55 to that number. But I would be looking for a bounce there, not necessarily a reversal, but at least a bounce tip. I don't really want to be talking about reversals as long as Bitcoin's below 60,000 bucks. It is better to be defensive in these sort of situations. On top of that, we can go ahead and look at traditional markets, symbol NQ here, NASDAQ futures. And while this one has had an incredibly nice bounce, and we have been looking for this move, I do believe that this bounce in the short term now is over, and we will see this one come down and very likely set in a higher low. I do still maintain my views on traditional markets that things are more or less fine here, but short term, it's retested the highs from the 1st of August. That is Thursday, the 1st of August, and it's had a really nice move to the upside here. I mean, this is a good place for a bit of a pullback, and things could theoretically pull back all the way even below 19,000 bucks very easily and still be a higher low. So I would be aware of that. In fact, let's go ahead and look at our major fibs right here. And we can see, the 382 is actually 18,800, and the 50% level is right around 18.5. So, if things pulled back even to these regions, that would be completely fine. Just be another higher low. In fact, the LARP line's over here, kind of getting it, but I'm going to get rid of that because it's never going to be like exactly like that, obviously. But in this case, what is Bitcoin going to look like when Bitcoin is playing weaker to the traditional markets, if traditional markets do pull back? I think the answer is quite obvious. Of course, there are some nice things in the background here, but they have just not been playing in the way that you would expect, which is why I always think it's better to be looking at the asset at hand. But I'm referencing Dixie here. We were looking at this one is likely to come down all the way to this blue zone based off of the breakdown like in early July. That's happened now. It has meant nothing for Bitcoin. It's definitely helped out traditional markets, yeah, absolutely, but nothing for Bitcoin. I mean, it's almost as if Bitcoin is correlated with the dollar. But I think that these are just phantoms to be to kind of be distracted with, anyways. Like, it doesn't really matter if Dixie's going down and Bitcoin's also going down. you know what I mean? Like, it's just it's more so hopium here, and realistically, dollar is probably likely to bounce relatively soon. So I don't know. Does that mean Bitcoin bounces because they're playing with each other right now? Who the fuck knows? But something to perhaps to consider, especially as we come into kind of closer to the end of the month here. But I expect that there could be one more stretch to the downside on the monthly for Dixie, maybe closer to that green 55, which is closer to about 101 region. But very likely a bounce attempt there. Although bounce, again, not the same thing as reversal. This one, I do believe, is entering into entering into a monthly downtrend. We have high, low, lower high, same low, lower high again, likely same low again. That typically is a recipe for, in this case, a downside move, but that's obviously going to take some time. This is a monthly after all. The real question is, does it matter for Bitcoin? So far it hasn't. So, I mean, there is that. Anyways, I just want to kind of sound the alarm bell, or continue to sound the alarm bell, since basically like the end of last week. It's like, look, just to make this as simple as possible, as long as Bitcoin's below 60,000 bucks, just exercise a bit of caution would be my sort of is kind of like my main message here. If Bitcoin can start to close back above 60,000 bucks, at that point, a little bit of hopium. Still, however, the biggest area for Bitcoin to kind of clear which would immediately make me say, hey, like this is good, and you should expect a run. Would be if Bitcoin can basically trade back above this high here from very early August. I think that was Thursday, the 8th of August, something like that, at around 62,500. But as of right now, pressure is onto the downside. Again, if there is going to be a downside test, it very likely does happen this week. You have momentum oscillators all pointing in the same direction. You have HPDR ranges starting to shift down like significantly here, and we do obviously have this 12-hour setup, which, it's not like a super damning thing right there, but it is obviously giving a higher probability, or it's actually not giving a higher probability. It's actually giving a 37% probability of a nice downside move. But I suspect that is kind of likely here, to be honest with you. So the real question to me is if Bitcoin, assuming that Bitcoin does play a downside move, what is going to be the response at one of those major numbers that we spoke about as areas of interest to the downside? And on top of that, like, is there going to be another one of these major wicks? If so, okay, there's still hopium for the Bitcoin BULAs. Like I said, I do think that probably ends up happening. But hey, if things are going to break down, like it likely does start to occur, I would say this week. Doesn't necessarily need to like fully break down this week, but just like the start of it. So do be aware of that. Obviously we can't really, fully analyze that until we get to the end of the week. I think a lot of people had like a very enlightening sort of education on that a couple weeks ago when we had this massive wick to the downside and it even closed, green on the week. But yeah, it's going to be a long week to go and we'll see where things kind of end off, but do be aware that in the short term, Bitcoin is poised to test some downside here. So I'll close things off on that note. As always, I want to wish you the best. Take care, much love, and see you hopefully next time.